Yes, so we are live on YouTube. So the session is yours. Karmit. Oh, hello, Anat.
Hi. So who starts?
As about adaptive security of practical governing schemes, and Sabine will give the talk.
Okay, thanks for the introduction. Yes, as Anat said, I'm going to talk about adaptive security of practical governing schemes. And this is joint work with Sarah Jaffagoli, who works for the company TSecure these days. So first of all, the title says governing scheme, so I should say quickly what a governing scheme is. It's basically the abstraction for a popular approach to secure multi-party computation. It was proposed in this form that I'm talking about by Bellara, Hong, and Roggeway in 2012. And you've probably all seen an example, which is Yau's governing scheme, which is like the underlying construction under Yau's gabbled circuits. So the basic idea is that a governing scheme consists of 5 algorithms: one algorithm GB for circuit gobbling, one algorithm EN for input encoding, then there's an output decoding algorithm DE, a gabbled circuit evaluation algorithm, EVE, IF, and a circuit evaluation. And then together you can use them to gabble a circuit and an input into some encoded form, and then evaluate them without leaking information about your input. That's the basic idea. So the standard security notion is a simulation-based security notion where we want to compare 2 games. There's a real game where an adversary can choose an input X and a circuit C to be gobbled, and then the game is going to gobble the inputs that the adversary chose according to the governing scheme specification that is using the algorithm GB and EN, and then output a gabbled circuit and a gabbled input. So I'm going to denote by this tilde versions. And then we compare that to an ideal game with a simulator where again the adversary chooses X and C, and then the simulator has to simulate a gabbled circuit and a gabbled input, but without knowing the input itself. So the simulator is going to get the circuit C and the output of the circuit C of X, or if of C and X if you want to use that notation. And then we say that a governing scheme has selective security if there exists a PPT simulator S for this ideal game, such that the game's outputs are computationally indistinguishable to any PPT adversary. It's like the very informal version of security here. There is not only Yau's governing scheme in this world, but we're actually, so in this paper, we're focusing on what we call practical governing schemes. That is like optimizations of Yau's governing scheme that give you practical efficiency gains. For example, free error reduction, 2-error reduction, the free XOR optimization, half gates, which is an optimization of free XOR, or the alternative governing scheme of Gueron, Lindell, North, and Pincus. And what they all have in common is that they try to reduce the gabbled circuit size over Yau's gobbling scheme, and they do that through correlating wire keys. And that is going to allow them to gobble a circuit with fewer ciphertexts. So the gabbled circuit itself is going to be smaller than in Yau's initial construction. So if you're familiar with those constructions, then and you think a bit about the selective security notion, then you notice one thing, which is the selective security notion assumes that you gobble input and circuit together, but there's, in principle, if you just look at the algorithms, there's nothing preventing you from gobble circuit and input separately. So that is in principle possible. It's possible in all the schemes that I talked about. And that is actually also convenient in some settings. Think of, for example, if you want to run secure multi-party computation in some kind of pre-processing model, where you could imagine that you want to gobble the circuit well in advance and then only later gobble the input. The problem here is that the setting is not covered by the selective security proof, because remember that said that the adversary chooses both the input and the circuit at the same time. For this reason, Bellara, Hong, and Roggeway also propose an adaptive security notion, which is kind of similar, but the difference is as follows. The adversary does not choose C and X together, but the adversary chooses first C, then gets to see the gobbled circuit, and then chooses an X. And then the game has to output a gobbled input. And so the real game, the game is honestly gobbling X. And in the ideal game, the simulator gets C of X now and has to output this gobbled X. Adaptive security is notoriously hard to achieve. That is also the case for gobbling schemes, but we do know a little bit. So for once, there are multiple transformations that basically take a gambling scheme with selective security and either modify the gambling scheme itself or modify or like assume stronger assumptions or assume strong assumptions basically to get adaptive security. So the idea is that you add some kind of power to equivocate the circuit gambling during the security proof. And that can be done in different ways. You can add another layer of encryption that you can then equivocate. That's this one-time pad construction that is on the slides, or you could do something like putting all this equivocation power into an assumption, which is the case if you assume that you have a random oracle that you can program, so that you can program, basically you can reprogram your encryption if you use the random oracle to encrypt. But then there are also basically two approaches that do not modify the construction itself. And that's what I'm going to be interested in here in this talk, because if you can manage to prove adaptive security directly without modifying the constructions, you preserve the efficiency of the construction itself. So there's one kind of naive approach, which is you can try to guess the input. That is always possible. So in the adaptive security game, you pretend that you're in the selective case and you just know the input. So you guess what the input is. And if you guess correctly, then the selective security proof goes through. Also in the adaptive case, but that incurs an exponential security loss. And then there's one other work that studied the adaptive security of Yar's gambling scheme without modifications. And that is a work by Jeff Agoli and Wicks. And this is kind of the basis of this work. So they show that Yar's gambling scheme, as it is actually adaptively secure for NC1 circuits. That is for circuits of logarithmic depth. I'm not going to go into detail how this construction works, but if you look at my longer recording or the paper, and then go to a bit more detail there. But so the question that we ask in this paper is, what about adaptive security of like other practically efficient gambling schemes? So anything that is more efficient than Yar's gambling scheme, but still in that family. That is, can we preserve the efficiency of the constructions and the assumptions? And I'm just going to go briefly over the results here. We have two kinds of results. One is kind of the bad news that some gambling schemes are probably not adaptively secure, and those are also the most efficient ones that we know right now. But there are also good news, which is there do actually exist more efficient gambling schemes, or gambling schemes that are more efficient than Yar's gambling scheme that have adaptive security for NC1 circuits again. So how does this look like? First, we examine the JW, so the technique by Jeff Agoli and Wicks for showing adaptive security of other gambling schemes. And so the idea is that they also start out from a selective security proof, in this case of Yar's gambling scheme, and they show how you can modify that into an adaptive security proof. So the observation is that in Yar's gambling scheme, in the proofs that exist already, you actually have fine-grained control over the gates. So in the security proof, you start from this real game, which gathers a circuit independent of the input. And you have the simulation, which also gathers a circuit independent of the input. But in between, you have hybrids where you need to know what the input is. That's why the selective security proof doesn't carry over to the adaptive case. And so the observation there is that in Yar's gambling scheme, you have kind of more control over how you choose those hybrids. That means you can limit the input dependencies to a minimum. So saying that in a hybrid, only a few gates that can be anywhere in the circuit, basically, are dependent on the current inputs. And that gives you an advantage in like guessing, because you only need to guess parts of the input. So we try to apply this technique to other gambling schemes, and we found like two obstacles, which seem to be kind of fundamental in proving adaptive security for more efficient gambling schemes. One is an obstacle is obviously if you have a gambling scheme that relies on like a global security assumption, like free XOR, which relies on either a random oracle, or if you don't want the random oracle, then it relies on some kind of circular correlation robust hash function, which is also kind of an assumption for the whole circuit. So in that case, you don't have this fine-grained control over which parts of the gambling are dependent on inputs and which ones are not. And the other obstacle is if you have constructions that where so I talked about correlations before, that gambling schemes get efficiency through correlating wire keys. And one way to do that is if you can compute the output wire keys as a function of the input wire keys. People do that to different degrees. And in kind of the most extreme cases that give you the most efficiency gain, the input wire keys determine uniquely what the output wire keys are. And in that case, you also lose this kind of control in the proof that allows you to prove adaptive security. And like constructions that fall into this are basically two-row reduction constructions. Yeah, half gates also follows into that, but it kind of falls into both categories. Yeah, and finally, the other positive result that we have is that we can actually show
Sabine,
adaptive security.
can you please wrap up? Sabine, sorry,
Yeah.
can you wrap up? Time
Sure.
is,
Sure, this is my last slide. So we can show that you can show adaptive security for zero reduction. We also show that's not technically a direct efficiency in terms of circuit size, but the point of permit technique is also not in the way. And then finally, we show a new construction, which is a variant of the construction by Guerin, Lindenov, and Pincus, based on just on the PFF assumption. And we can show that you can garble AND gates with 3 ciphertexts and XOR gates with 2 ciphertexts and get adaptive security. Yeah, that's it. If you want more details, then please consult the paper, and I'm happy to take questions if we have time for that.
Okay, thanks a lot. And will we have time for questions? Like, I don't see questions, but I have a quick one if there is time. What do you think, Kermit?
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, so just a small one. So you say that for other schemes there are obstacles, right? So it might be impossible, but it's only when considering your approach, right? So there could be other approaches that would work, or you kind of feel that it's kind of hopeless. I mean, just in terms of intuition, right? Because
in terms of intuition, yes. So my gut feeling is that it's one of those cases where you can't prove that it's impossible, but also there isn't really a way to prove that it's possible either.
I see.
Yeah, this is my gut feeling.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sabine. Great talk.
Okay, let's go for right. The next speaker. Yes.
Hello, can I share my slide now?
Yes, sure.
Yes, go ahead.
Can you see the slides?
Yes. See. Okay, great. So
next, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah. Okay. So our next talk is constructive TSecure homomorphic secret sharing for low-degree polynomials. And Kitty Pop, did I say it correctly? Will give the talk?
Yes.
Okay. Please go ahead.
Okay, so hello, I am Kitty Pop Palakan from the University of Tokyo. I'm going to present the work with the title Constructive T-Scale Homomorphic Secret Sharing for Low-Degree Polynomials. This is a joint work with Wrapup, Supakit Paisan, Ratapong Attapadungs, and Kantak Masura. Let me first briefly explain about homomorphic secret sharing. Homomorphic secret sharing is a way to outsource the computation to a set of servers while restricting some subsets of servers from learning about the secret inputs. In this work, we considered a setting as shown in the diagram. There are input clients, and each has its secret input. The input clients secretly shares the inputs to the computing servers. The goal of the scheme is to let the output client learn the desired function of the inputs. And for security, no one should know the input except its owner. Homomorphic secret sharing can be seen as a multi-party computation protocol with small number of communications. And for the applications, it enables secure computation on cloud servers where inputs must be kept secret. It also enables secure machine learning where the training data and models may be sensitive. And in the previous work of Lai et al., they proposed a homomorphic secret sharing scheme based on homomorphic encryption. However, it is only one secure. This means any subsets of servers should not collude at all, including any pairs of servers, which is not realistic situation. And moreover, in the suggested TSecure scheme, where at most T servers can collude, the scheme requires solving NP-hard problems and require T-square servers. So in this work, we propose TSecure homomorphic secret sharing scheme for low-degree polynomials that does not require solving NP-hard problem, and if there is no numbers of required servers. Our scheme is also based on homomorphic encryption, and we use the idea of secret sharing from the work of Ito et al. For the contributions, firstly, we increase the maximum computable degree of homomorphic secret sharing scheme compared to Shamir's scheme. Compared to the classic Shamir scheme, which is information theoretically secure and does not based on homomorphic encryption, our scheme with homomorphic encryption has around k times increasing in the degree of homomorphic secret sharing. The security model of Shamir and our scheme are both threshold T. Secondly, we add threshold structures to the work of Lai et al. Our work supports any value of threshold. The final degree that our scheme can compute based on degree k homomorphic encryption is k plus 1 times m minus 1 divided by t, as shown in the bottom right of the table. Comparing to the work of Lai et al., our computable degree has a division of t as a trade-off with security. Thirdly, we decrease the number of required servers in TSecure scheme of Lai et al. In their work, only one setting of TSecure scheme is suggested. They consider the numbers of servers as a result, while other parameters are considered as requirements. Comparing to T-square servers in their work, our scheme do not have a restriction on the numbers of servers. And finally, it can be seen that we extend the capability of homomorphic encryption. Comparing to the setting using only homomorphic encryption, we mitigate the single point of failure by adding more servers to the scheme and also increase the computable degree at the same time. You may notice that the number of shares of our scheme seems to be large. But for small t or when t is close to m, the number of shares is not that large. And for other values of t, possible improvements from non-threshold non-access structure is discussed in the paper. I'm not going to the detail here, and this is all the introduction that I would like to present today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Can I ask a quick question about the threshold T here?
Yes, please.
So if you have security against with threshold T, would you not have security with threshold T minus 1? Is it monotonous or not monotonous? I'm asking because if as T increases as you said, T is close to M, your number of shares is smaller. So why can I not take T equal to M minus 1 or something all the time?
Maybe it depends on the application. Maybe like if some, I'm not sure, but that's right. Maybe we should like increase the threshold so the share is smaller. I understand your question correctly.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, we can take it offline. So you're saying it may be possible to just consider a larger T. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, one more question we have. Ashish is asking, what is the degree of the homomorphic encryption?
Actually, the degree of the homomorphic encryption is the degree that the underlying homomorphic encryption supports for the computing the polynomial. Actually, I have not going into detail on the homomorphic encryption, but actually Our scheme is based on homomorphic encryption. And for degree K homomorphic encryption, it allows you to compute a polynomial of degree K on ciphertext. That's the brief explanation.
Okay, yeah, you can take it offline as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next speaker can set up.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
So I'll get started now.
Yeah, so the next talk is about perfectly secure asynchronous MPC for general adversaries, and Nikhil will give the talk.
Yeah. So I'll be talking about our results on perfectly secure asynchronous MPC for general adversaries. This is joint work with my co-author Ashish Chaudhary. So to summarize our results, we study asynchronous secure multi-party computation in the asynchronous communication model, tolerating a generalized non-threshold adversary. We show that the only other protocol in this setting by Kumar et al. Is flawed, and we present perfectly secure asynchronous verifiable secret sharing and perfectly secure AMPC protocols. As a sub-contribution, we also present an asynchronous Byzantine agreement protocol, which is a generalization of the protocol of Canetti et al. In the threshold setting. So to take a step back, secure multi-party computation allows a set of parties to compute a function of their private inputs, even if some of them are corrupted, and while guaranteeing certain security properties, for instance, privacy, which means that the honest party's inputs are not revealed to the adversary, and several other properties. This is equivalent to an ideal model where there is a trusted third party who can receive inputs from the parties and compute the outputs and send them out to the parties. So most work on MPC has been in the threshold setting where the adversary can corrupt up to a certain fraction of the total number of parties. However, this can be limiting. Consider an example as shown where there are 6 parties here running different operating systems, and an adversary corrupting who finds a bug in one operating system can corrupt all the parties running that operating system. And let's say they want to have like computational security with guaranteed output delivery. In this setting, like for a threshold protocol, one can tolerate only up to 2 corruptions. So the adversary's corruption capability can be specified by an adversary structure, which consists of the sets of potentially corruptible sets. And the adversary structure is monotone in the sense that subsets of potentially corruptible sets are also potentially corruptible sets, but we only consider maximal sets of parties in the adversary structure. The adversary structure also has size possibly exponential in n due to the total number of possible subsets. So such a specification offers increased flexibility. The downside is that known protocols have communication complexities of constant powers of the size of the adversary structure, and the computational complexity is bounded below by the size of the adversary structure. So most work on general adversaries has been in the synchronous communication model, where there's a globally known upper bound and the parties have access to synchronized clocks. And the work of general adversaries was initiated by Hurt and Maurer, who gave feasibility results, and later protocols improved the communication and computation complexities. And there were several other works in different settings. In the asynchronous communication model, there is no such upper bound on the message delays. And in this setting, the only other work is that of Kumar et al., who also explored the setting of perfect security. And they presented an AVSS protocol based on monotone span programs and presented an AMPC protocol, which we showed to be flawed. The details are in the paper. And we present an AVSS protocol that is based on an additive secret sharing scheme based on the secret sharing scheme given by Maurer. and we give AMPC and ABA protocols as mentioned previously. So we use an asynchronous Byzantine agreement protocol in our AMPC protocol. Asynchronous Byzantine agreement is realized by the following ideal functionality, where there are n parties who each have an input bit and want to agree on a common bit, and such that they send their inputs to the trusted third party, who can specify the honest party's inputs to ignore due to the asynchronous nature of communication. And if it finds that the inputs of all the honest parties are the same, then the trusted third party sends the input of the honest parties to all the parties, and this captures the property known as validity. If this is not the case and all the honest parties considered are not in agreement, then an input of a corrupted party is sent to all the parties, and this captures the property known as agreement. So we build an asynchronous Byzantine agreement protocol using a standard framework of building asynchronous Byzantine agreement using a common coin protocol and an AVSS protocol. So a common coin protocol allows the parties to output a common random bit. So our AVSS protocol is perfectly secure and is used to build a common coin protocol, which is a generalization of the threshold protocol of Canetti et al. The protocol of Canetti et al. Guarantees that the probability with which all the honest parties output a common bit is a constant. However, it is not clear if a direct generalization of the protocol guarantees even a non-zero probability. So we specify a modification. However, even with the modification, the success probability of our protocol is guaranteed only to be greater than 1 over n. This is due to the fact that the success probability of our protocol depends on the largest potentially corruptible set. Our ABA protocol is almost surely terminating and terminates with probability 1 asymptotically. And due to the success probability of our common coin protocol, our ABA protocol has an expected running time of the order of n squared. There are several future directions for our work. One is to improve the communication complexity of our protocols, and our protocols are based on an additive secret sharing scheme. One could explore secret sharing schemes based on monotone span programs. Such protocols can have better efficiencies for certain adversary structures over protocols based on additive secret sharing schemes. One could consider efficient non-optimally resilient protocols in the setting. And also this settings of statistical and computational security in the asynchronous model are still unexplored. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. So I have a quick question. So do you need the linearity of the underlying secret sharing scheme, or so you say?
Yeah.
Okay, you need it, right? So that's
it
why
is a linear.
Okay.
Just one more quick question. Maybe I missed it. What's the communication complexity of our protocol?
The MPC protocol?
Yeah.
It's cubic in the size of the adversary structure.
Okay, let me check. No more questions.
Yeah,
so yeah, thank you very much, Mikhail.
Thanks a lot. So let's move to our next talk.
Okay, so
great.
Am I audible?
Yes, everything good. So our next talk is on improving the efficiency of optimally resilient, statistically secure asynchronous multi-party computation. And Ashish will give the talk.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. So secure multi-party computation is a fundamental concept in secure distributed computing, and the setting is as follows. We have a set of n mutually distrusting parties, some of which could be corrupt, and the goal is to securely compute a publicly known function of the private inputs of the parties for which the parties interact, and the protocol should achieve a set of properties. The standard way of specifying the security is that the interaction among the parties should be equivalent as if the parties are interacting with a trusted third party who, upon receiving the function inputs, compute the function output and give it back to the respective parties. So in this work, we study the problem in the more practical asynchronous communication model. So asynchronous communication model models the real world networks like the internet more appropriately than the synchronous communication model. In asynchronous network model, we do not have the notion of global clock, and there is no known upper bound on the message delays. The only guarantee in the model is that any message which is sent will be delivered eventually. And due to this, no receiving party will know how long it has to wait for an expected message. And due to this, the receiver will always be in a confusion where the receiver cannot distinguish between a slow but honest sender and a corrupt sender. If we consider a threshold model where we have a set of n parties and up to t parties could be corrupt, then in a completely asynchronous protocol, no receiving party can afford to wait to receive the messages from all the n parties, as it may turn out to be an endless wait. And that's why as soon as a receiving party receives messages from any set of n minus t parties, it has to go to the next step of the protocol. But in this process, the receiving party might be ignoring messages from up to t potentially honest parties. So in this work, we consider the most stronger adversarial model, namely we consider unconditional security where the adversary could be computationally unbounded. And the classic results due to Benor et al. Shows that if we want to achieve perfect security, then the optimal resilience is t is less than n over 4. Whereas if we are fine with statistical security, then one can tolerate up to t less than n over 3 corruptions. So our focus in this work is on the communication complexity per multiplication gate for asynchronous, statistically secure asynchronous MPC protocol, and that too with the optimal resilience of t less than n over 3, and these are the relevant results. So the work of Benor et al. Has tremendous communication complexity per multiplication gate, which was improved by the work of Patra et al. To n to the power 5 times kappa per multiplication gate per multiplication. And in this work, we further improved the communication complexity by a factor of n. Here, kappa is the statistical security parameter. So there are some inherent challenges in designing AMPC protocols with optimal resilience of t less than n over 3. And the key bottleneck is to design or get an instantiation of verifiable summy secret sharing. So summy secret sharing is very simple. If dealer wants to share a secret, it has to just pick a polynomial of degree t and evaluate the polynomial at distinct points, which constitutes the shares. But this protocol will work only in the passive setting where all the parties honestly follow the protocol instructions. If we want to take this protocol to the asynchronous model where the dealer itself could be potentially corrupt, then we end up getting what we call as incomplete secret sharing, where we get a guarantee that only n minus t parties or shareholders confirm the receipt of their shares. And there could be up to t honest parties from whom we do not get the confirmation that they have got their respective shares. But the problem with this incomplete secret sharing is that later, if we want to reconstruct a value which is secret shared in an incomplete fashion, then at the time of reconstruction among the n minus t shareholders, only n minus 2t shareholders might turn up with their shares. And for the optimal resilience of t less than n over 3, these n minus 2t shares do not have sufficient number of correct shares in them to do the error correction. And that's why we cannot use this incomplete secret sharing to do the shared circuit evaluation. So motivated by this, the work of Benor et al. Introduced the notion of asynchronous complete secret sharing, which can be thought of asynchronous version of verifiable secret sharing, where we have a designated dealer with some private input S, and we want two different types of properties depending upon whether the dealer is honest or corrupt. If the dealer is honest, then we require that his secret S should be eventually summit shared and it should remain secure. Whereas for a corrupt dealer, we want a guarantee that if the honest parties complete the protocol and output some shares, then those shares should correspond to some summit sharing of a value S star held by the dealer. So in terms of ideal functionality, the ACSS functionality that we want to realize here is the following. So the dealer provides a sharing polynomial f of x, and the functionality verifies whether the polynomial is of degree t or not. And if the verification is successful, then it asynchronously delivers these shares to the respective shareholders. So the work of Benor et al. Did provided an instantiation of asynchronous complete secret sharing, but it has tremendous communication complexity, which is attributed to the fact that there are several layers of protocols which are involved to get their instantiation, starting from the notion of AICP, which is information theoretic analog of signatures. And apart from that, there are lots of other sub-protocols also involved. The work of Patra et al. Further simplified this approach by getting rid of several sub-protocols. So for instance, they got rid of the ARS primitive and the 2 and some AWSS primitive. In this work, we further simplify the approach of ACSS protocol of Patra et al. By getting rid of the AWSS primitive. And in the process, we get a saving of order n in the communication complexity. So I refer you to the full version of the paper. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions?
So we have no questions on the Zoom channel, nor here. Anat, do you have any question?
So not quite. Like I was wondering about like, are there some lower bounds on communication complexity? But probably not, right? It's probably hard.
Yes, we do not have any. That's a very good question, actually. So unfortunately, we do not have, unlike the Byzantine agreement, which is a well-studied problem where we have a lower bound of n square for communication complexity. For asynchronous MPC, we do not have any lower bound.
Thanks.
So another quick question. Does the concept of guaranteed output delivery is meaningful in this setting?
Yes, actually, we aim for guaranteed output delivery only. So
Okay.
because I don't think it is, I don't know how to model security with abort, because you are expecting messages from parties. So you don't know when to abort, because the message scheduling is also under the control of the adversaries. So since you do not have the notion of time, you do not know how long you have to wait and decide to abort.
I see. Oh, so thank you very much. Very interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, we can continue with the, I think it's the last talk of this session.
Are my slides visible?
Yes. So the next talk is about high throughput secure MPC over small population in hybrid networks. And Aditya is going to give the talk.
Yeah. Hello everyone. I'm Aditya and I'll be presenting high throughput secure MPC over small population in hybrid networks. This is joint work with Ashish Chaudhary. So MPC over small population has recently gained a lot of attention because protocols in this setting are quite simple and efficient, and so they can be applied to real world applications like privacy preserving machine learning and server aided computation. And in our work, we consider the case of 4 parties with 1 corruption. And the corrupted party is controlled by a malicious adversary that can cause the party to arbitrarily deviate from the protocol. So our contributions include a perfectly secure MPC protocol over hybrid networks with 2 initial synchronous rounds. And this is the first protocol in this setting. We also present a cryptographically secure MPC protocol over hybrid networks with one initial synchronous round, and a cryptographically secure MPC protocol over asynchronous networks. And all our protocols basically do a shared circuit evaluation over arithmetic circuits to achieve high throughput. Our protocols over hybrid networks use the optimal number of synchronous rounds. Our our cryptographically secure protocols use only symmetric key primitives, and this improves over prior works which use heavy public key operations and zero knowledge proofs, which often have a high computation and communication overhead. And finally, all our protocols provide guaranteed output delivery and have optimal resilience. We also implement and benchmark our cryptographically secure MPC protocol over asynchronous networks. And yeah, you can refer to our full paper for some of these implementation and benchmark details. So I've been mentioning about hybrid networks, but what exactly are hybrid networks? To kind of motivate this communication model, I think it's important to take a step back and look at synchronous and asynchronous networks. So synchronous networks are the most commonly used networks in MPC, and here all the parties are synchronized by a global clock. So and there's a publicly known upper bound on message delay. So if a party send their messages at T1, the receiver can expect the messages to be delivered by T1 plus the upper bound delta. So, and if he does not get a message, he knows that the sender is corrupt. So computation in this setting can proceed in rounds where each round has a time width of delta time units. Asynchronous networks, on the other hand, are networks where there's no synchronization, and the adversary basically is in charge of or has control over scheduling of messages. The only guarantee is that any message that has been sent will be eventually delivered. So it's impossible to distinguish between a delayed message and a message that hasn't been sent in this setting. And moreover, the receiver can wait for only n-t messages, including his own message, at each step. Asynchronous networks, in addition to providing a stronger security model, also have some other advantages. So they do model the real world better because networks like the internet don't have a well-defined upper bound on message delivery. And synchronization is a hard problem anyway in the real world because of issues like clock drift. Moreover, if honest parties have small channel delays, then asynchronous networks can actually proceed at the rate of the underlying network and be faster than synchronous networks. However, asynchronous protocols over asynchronous networks often have lower fault tolerance owing to the stricter security model, and they also suffer from input deprivation because even in the input phase, inputs from at most T parties will have to be ignored because of the problem that we discussed previously. So it's only possible to compute an approximation of the functionality in this case. So to kind of overcome these problems, hybrid networks were introduced where we have a minimal synchrony assumption, in the sense that we have our initial synchronous rounds followed by completely asynchronous computation. And in our work, we also assume a synchronous broadcast channel in the first rounds. So the aim in hybrid networks is to construct protocols that are that assume minimal synchrony and also kind of overcome some of the drawbacks of asynchronous networks. So Patra and Ravi, in their work in 2018, suggest an open problem of designing a perfectly secure MPC protocol over hybrid networks that uses only 2 synchronous rounds and tolerates 1/3 corruptions and achieves guaranteed output delivery. And this protocol, the open problem, you could design this with or without using a synchronous broadcast channel. And they also show that it's impossible to achieve input provision in this setting. So we make some progress in solving this problem because, for the n is equal to 4 and 1 t is equal to 1 case. Our cryptographically secure hybrid and asynchronous MPC protocols have similar structure to the perfectly secure protocol, except that we are able to optimize a lot of the sub-protocols using a one-time symmetric key setup. In this case, our cryptographically secure hybrid protocol does achieve input provision because the triple generation, which is the pre-processing that we used, Weaver triples, and the input phase terminate in 1 round. And the circuit evaluation proceeds completely asynchronously. And over asynchronous networks, we have to rely on primitives like acast and agreement on core set. And obviously, we cannot provide input provision. So one of the more interesting experiments that we ran was kind of verifying if asynchronous protocols are indeed robust to network delays. So what we did was we introduced random and arbitrarily large delays to certain parties, which we call affected parties, and we observed the latency in computing the online phase and the offline phase. And we observed that when there are no affected parties or when there is one affected party, the latency is quite similar, and as it's clearly shown in the WAN case, especially. And and when more parties are getting affected, the latency slowly increases. And this kind of shows that asynchronous networks are indeed kind of robust to random network delays, because the case of one affected party is essentially equivalent to a malicious party that does not send, that sends late. So the other three parties' messages are received first. And in case of synchronous networks, this wouldn't have been the case, and there would have been a global, we would have to set a global upper bound that can that is large enough to receive messages from all parties. And so asynchronous networks do run faster. Some of the open problems from our work are that the problem of constructing a perfectly secure hybrid protocol over perfectly secure MPC protocol over hybrid networks for the general case is still open. We utilize the fact that there is only one malicious party, and this does not carry over to the general case. It's also interesting to bridge the gap between synchronous and asynchronous MPC protocols, because currently our asynchronous MPC protocols have around 18 elements of communication per multiplication gate in the online phase, or when the actual or the input dependent phase. And synchronous protocols, on the other hand, have like 2 or 3 elements at the most. So it's interesting to bridge this gap, and so that asynchronous protocols can be applied in practice. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions?
Here.
I could ask a question. So Aditi, you said your main issue is that you cannot handle T more than 1. Does it work for n greater than or equal to 4, or only for n equal to 4? So if T is 1.
So yeah, so we actually use replicated secret sharing. So the techniques that we've used don't kind of extend to greater than n equal to 4 for the perfectly secure protocol. But for our cryptographically secure, they do extend, because the RSA structure can be changed so that it does work for greater than 4. But again, for the general case, the sharing semantics kind of lead to exponential communication costs, because that's the structure of replicated secret sharing.
I see. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Nat, do you have any question?
So you say you just tried to you just tackled the single malicious party, right? So I don't know, did you look at at 2 malicious parties to see if it's hard already, like really hard, or required?
So I think when there's a when we have 4 parties and 2 corruptions, it goes into dishonest majority. So I think the protocols, the underlying like structure of the protocols itself kind of changes significantly in that case. But yeah, that's an interesting thing, and we haven't really looked at it, especially in the asynchronous setting. That would be interesting.
Okay, so it's not just an issue of like efficiency. So let's say you can increase the total number of parties and not worry about communication complexity, right? Because like if it's constant, then it's still a large constant, if I understand correctly. So
yeah, so we can tolerate at most 1/3 corruption. So if we have 2 parties, it goes to like 7. We need 7 parties to have a protocol that achieves guaranteed output delivery. And the problem is that in that setting, we can't have concrete efficiencies using like the techniques that have been used in our work, like using replicated secret sharing. So I think a general party protocol would work better in that case. Rather than kind of handcrafting it for 4 parties or a small population.
I see. So it's kind of an issue of concrete complexity, right? So that's
Exactly. Yes.
what it's limited by. Okay, thanks. I see.
Okay, just one basic question. You were saying
Yeah,
input
sorry.
provision at some point. What do
Yeah.
you mean by input provision?
It's like the opposite of input deprivation in the sense that so in asynchronous networks, because inputs of at most T parties would have to be ignored in the input phase, because we don't know if they're malicious and haven't sent their inputs, or if their messages are just delayed. So so input provision is when the inputs of all parties can be considered. And in our cryptographically secure protocol over hybrid networks, even though we have only one synchronous round, we're able to kind of use that to achieve input provision.
I see. Okay, thank you very much for all speakers. Great session.
Yeah, definitely.
So thank you, Karmit and Anat, for chairing this session. So we will take a short break of 8 minutes and come back for the invited talk.